Welcome, Jesper.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. You have had a long career, not saying that you are old or anything, but with your own words, what is it that you do?
So, if I should just put one small sentence on it, I think what I do well is to drive changes in big organizations that don't want to change.
That don't want to change.
That don't want to change. That's typically where I do the best.
Okay.
Yes.
And what's fascinating about that? What is it that drives you in terms of changing organizations that don't want to change?
I think what I really like about it is the challenge in that.
Yeah.
And also seeing the results and seeing when people realize that change is for good, even people who are very resistant in the beginning.
Okay.
That I really enjoy.
Okay. And you've been with the Rambøll for six years?
6 years.
Yeah. And when you arrived back in the days,
Yes.
what was then the major challenges that you saw there? What was the situation?
Well, I think first of all, I had a certain impression of Rambøll before I joined. A very polished impression, maybe. Big international company, very successful, presence in a number of countries, quite international Danish company. I was surprised when I joined. I was surprised how Danish the company still was. And I don't just mean the fact that the headquarters was there, but the entire culture was very Danish. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was a surprise coming into an international company that operated in a very Danish way, even down to people writing and communicating in Danish, and just ignoring the fact that there were colleagues who did not know the language. Just down to also something like we were 4 people in the global IT organization at the time.
Wow.
That was a bit surprising. And it's not because that there weren't
How big a company was it at that time?
At that time, there were 12,000 employees.
And 4 in IT?
And 4 in global IT.
4 in global IT.
4 in global IT. To be fair, there were hundreds of people doing IT, but scattered all over the organization.
Okay.
There had been some attempts at consolidation and standardization, but quite limited, actually. To be fair, they had been successful with having one global ERP solution and one network. But still, a lot of things were very local, were very business unit specific, both in terms of technology, but also in terms of the organization. That was a surprise.
Yeah, I could imagine that.
Yes.
That sounds like crazy.
Yes.
So what the challenges that you were facing now that you were 4 people in global IT and everything being fragmented, what was then the challenge that you were what was it that you had to approach? What was it that you had to do to change that situation?
Well, I think first and foremost, it was about creating the understanding that we needed to do something about it.
Yeah.
I got hired into Rambøll because they wanted to do something about it, they said. And they did, to be fair. But it was only few people who saw the need, actually.
Okay.
And I still remember the first couple of days I was there, I would meet a lot of people, and they were all very, very nice. But one of the things that they kept saying to me was, welcome, and you're now going to do a lot of PowerPoints. So that was not very encouraging for me because I wanted to change things, right? I didn't want to create PowerPoints about what we could potentially do. I wanted to actually do them. But luckily, we got the opportunity to turn PowerPoint into action, which was good. So within very short time, we presented a plan to really consolidate the technology organizations across Rambøll into one global IT organization, and then make some significant changes there.
Okay. And then when you went from being the fragmented organization to the more consolidated global IT organization, I imagine that you also had to then figure out, okay, what's the next steps from being now a consolidated, but then how do you then take IT to the next level?
Yes.
Did you then embark on a new strategy project, or how did you then approach the situation there?
So, well, we did a strategy where consolidating the organization was part of it.
Yeah.
Because we could see we could barely operate as it was. We definitely could not develop a lot on the technology with the organization we had. So we saw that we needed to consolidate. We also needed to free up resources, like you always do in a strategy exercise. So we decided to offshore roughly half of the positions to a new center we created in Chennai, in India, so we could free up money for investments. At that time, the investments that we needed to do were mostly in cybersecurity.
Okay.
I had just, before joining Rambøll, I had spent quite a number of years with Maersk. And one of the last things I experienced with Maersk was the big cyber attack in 2017. So when I joined Rambøll and realized that there was one person working with cybersecurity in the entire organization, I almost left, but then I decided to give it a go. But I also made it a condition that we were going to be allowed to invest in cybersecurity. And luckily we were. They saw the need as well, which is good.
Okay. And then, so cybersecurity was one of the priorities within the new strategy.
Definitely.
Cost savings was also one of them.
And then also scalability. You can say a lot of what we were doing at the time, and also in the 6 years I've been with Rambøll, has been aligning with Rambøll's overall journey from a conglomerate of a lot of different companies or businesses into a real global corporation. And that's a journey that's been ongoing and is ongoing. And we wanted to align with that. So being able to provide global services, IT services, technology services to our colleagues was a big part of what we wanted to do as well. As mentioned, there had been some attempts at that before. So ERP was globalized, the network was globalized, but a lot of other things were not. And even the ones that had been globalized, I would say they had only been partially successful. So there's been this drive to standardize certain things, but not taking local needs into consideration. So it's been very, very top-down, which can be a good way of doing it if you are successful with delivering what's needed. And that was not always the case. We had a model, we jokingly called it one size fits no one, because they had standardized a lot and it didn't work for anyone, really. So part of it was to globalize, but also to globalize in a way where we standardized only what made sense to standardize and still allowed for local deviations that made sense. So, for instance, we saw that our team in Finland, they really did not want to work in English. They couldn't work in English. The customers didn't work in English. So we allowed them to still operate in Finnish as the only country they had local language. But we operated it. That was the difference. So it was still operated globally. And the parts that were in Finnish were only the parts that absolutely needed to be in Finnish and nothing else.
Okay. Sustainability has also always been a big part of Rambøll's identity and priorities. Were you able to get that perspective into the IT strategy as well?
Yes, we did. And I have to say, I mean, I've worked with IT sustainability in a number of my roles also before joining Rambøll, and it's always a challenging one. We did manage to get it into the IT strategy at Rambøll, and real discussion there was actually very much around cost versus sustainability, because running IT in a sustainable way does come with a cost, and somehow you can say senior leadership doesn't want to hear that. There's this notion that if we use less resources, also less costly. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes you do need to pay more for being sustainable, and a big part of our sustainability strategy with technology is just using the right data centers, to be honest. It's very, very basic. But of course, you can choose the right data centers with the right energy mix at a cost. And that's actually where the biggest impact is. And then you can do smaller adjustments as well. The hardware can be recycled and things like that. But the real impact comes from the data centers. And that's going to cost.
All right. You have your own data center, right? Or do you still have that?
No longer.
No longer?
Yes. We do have still a few servers in the basement for, few critical things, but we don't really operate like a real data center anymore. That's no longer the case.
Was that because of cost or sustainability considerations? Or?
A bit of a mix, I would say. A bit of a mix. we don't get the right sustainability energy mix basically where we had the data center, and also you can say when we changed the organization, we also saw that we were keeping people around just for the sake of operating a data center that we didn't actually need.
Okay. Going back to the strategy part of this, you had a different priorities. So you had something about scalability,
Yes.
cost, consolidation. How did you then go from having those priorities to actually have some focus areas or initiatives that you were focusing on? And what were those initiatives?
So I think the big challenge actually was to take our time, because of course organizational cultures are different, but what I've seen in many organizations is that senior leadership already has a very, very clear view on objectives and priorities. And the easiest thing in the world would be to take a week and just write all those down into some really nice looking PowerPoint slides, and then you're done. But that's not going to get you there, because you also have to implement afterwards, right? And you might not be doing the right things if you just do that. So sometimes convincing stakeholders that we need to take our time to talk to the right people to really get all the perspectives, and then consolidate and validate. We use a hypothesis-driven way of working, where we did use input from senior stakeholders to create some hypotheses, but we spent enough time on validating those. Because if we didn't do that, then we just risk running in the way the CEO wants to run, which can be good, but can also not be good. When it comes to discussions like this, I always like to use what I call a 3D model. It sounds a little bit rough, and some people get scared when I say it, but it's discuss, decide, and discipline. I learned it from a former boss of mine who was German, so you can tell where it kind of comes from, right? But it really works actually, because typically what goes wrong in processes like this is that you can fail at any of those 3 steps, because it has to be that sequence. If you don't spend enough time discussing and just rush to a decision, likelihood is that you're making the wrong decision, or at least there's a higher likelihood that you're making the wrong decision. Now, the other extreme of that is the endless discussions that never reach a decision. This can sometimes be how we are perceived in the Nordics by people from the outside, right? People who just discuss and discuss and discuss and never land on anything. So it's important to have the right discussions, have them with the right people, and invest the time to have those discussions, to get all the perspectives into play. But then also to reach a decision point where you outline the decisions and you have very, very clear decisions made. And then the last 3, the discipline. This is about sticking to decisions that have been made, and this is often very difficult, because you can see sometimes in organizations that people don't participate in the process because they can see that there's not going to be discipline around it anyway. So you don't want to discuss. Why should you invest time in giving your perspective? You don't necessarily raise your voice when decisions are being made, because there's no consequence of not doing it. And then you get into poor execution, because you are not disciplined around the decisions you've made. Then you try a little bit and you maybe succeed with something, but by far most of it you'll not succeed with.
Okay. So there's a lot of change management in that flow as well.
Yes, exactly. Including, by the way, I think, if you talk about, allowing time for discussions, that's often there are some people who feel like they're decision makers. They don't need to listen to people, so they don't want the discussion. Or they might feel like they already have a very clear view. So the changing their minds, some people who are very insistent, they know what to do already, changing their minds is key. And then also, I think when it comes to the discipline around the execution, staying focused can sometimes be difficult, because there's also a tendency that once the decision is made, some people assume that then execution is a given, and it's definitely not.
And how do you then, now you mentioned focus as being one part of it, how do you make sure that the people involved keep disciplined and focused on the decision that you made?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because you often see that people get distracted easily, especially when you have an organization where a lot of changes are happening at once. There's typically some initiatives that it's more interesting to be part of than others. Some initiatives that have more attention, and people tend to kind of gravitate towards those. But that actually comes back to ambition level, the way I see it. So if you make sure that you are making a sufficiently ambitious transformation program, people will want to be part of it, and that's a part of keeping it focused. I actually think that there's a natural kind of flow in this, where if you have an initiative running that loses the interest of the stakeholders, well, then maybe you're not being ambitious enough or having a big enough impact.
Makes sense. One of the things that recently happened in Rambøll is, of course, the outsourcing.
Yes.
Why did that end up being such a big part of the strategy of Rambøll to outsource such a big part of the IT operations?
Yeah. Well, it was a long time coming, I would say. We made a new IT strategy back in late 2022, where one of the things we saw was that the need for investments was much, much bigger than we had actually expected it to be. And I think this is a good example of why having that discussion and spending enough time on that is key, because we went into that strategy process thinking, of a certain level of investments that we probably needed to do. And then when we work with stakeholders to understand what the real opportunities were and what the real challenges were, we saw that the investment needs was something like 3 or 4 times what we had initially anticipated. So that, of course, changed the picture completely in what we needed to do. So it was clear that we needed to do something to at least help finance that investment need. Rambøll is a company that invests a lot, but typically invest in acquisitions. So acquisitions. Whenever we talk about making an investment, immediately people think, so which acquisition are we making? And so making a big investment into digitalization is something that at least, we need to come with some money for that as well. We can't just go and ask for it. So that immediately raised a number of questions around how do we find that money? And one of them was, of course, the technology spend that we had. The opportunities to do something there were limited. We could do something, but not nearly enough. And then the other big cost item is the organization. And we had already done a lot. So we had already offshored around half of the staff in global IT. And that meant that our maneuver room was limited. We could do something. We could do more offshoring. But it wouldn't get us there. It simply wouldn't get us there. Plus, also what we saw was that in order to actually drive down the IT cost, we would have to invest in IT. And that's not where we wanted to invest, right? We wanted to invest in digital products for our customers. We wanted to invest in AI and other things that had bigger business benefits rather than just investing into IT. So what we decided to do was to explore the opportunity of outsourcing, simply because we had an assumption that an outsourcing partner would be able to do more when it comes to offshoring or organizational efficiency, but also because we felt that if we do that, then we put more pressure on the organization. Because once you've signed that contract, well, guess what? It's going to happen. It's not up for discussion anymore. Back to discussion, decide, discipline. I think there was a little bit of a fear that we could decide now to offshore even more. And then we made that decision and then get distracted afterwards. Then a big M&A would come along or a big implementation of some sort would come along, and then we would kind of forget to do the offshoring. So it was also a way to get that commitment to actually execute. And then also, very importantly, we saw that we needed to invest a lot still in IT. So internal IT processes, cybersecurity, new software store, what have you, all kinds of things. And we just have to also be very honest with ourselves that we are not the best to do that. Someone like an outsourcing partner, they can do that much faster and much easier than we do. They do that all the time, and we do it once every 5, 6, 10 years.
That makes sense. How did you actually get to the conclusion of outsourcing? Because, as you say, like discuss, decision, and then discipline. Going from discussion to actually deciding, I guess that was a big step.
Yes.
How did you come to that decision? What was it that made you end up there? And how did you convince the stakeholders?
So we ran this agile sourcing process.
Okay.
And we did that in a way where actually we had not finally decided to do it until in the middle of that process. So we didn't run a very traditional process where we decided we need to outsource, and then we send an RFP, and then you sign a contract and off you go. We looked at a couple of different options. So we looked at again the offshoring, but we also looked at outsourcing pretty much everything, and then we looked at an option of outsourcing roughly 2/3. That was kind of the three options we worked with. And we knew we wanted to change the organization, and we also knew that we wanted to be able to free up roughly 25% of the run cost of the organization for reinvestment. That's all we knew going into this process. And in parallel, we were looking at the offshoring option and the two outsourcing options. And then we kept that open for quite long into the process, actually. So we started a process with the potential vendors for the outsourcing, where we asked them for proposals. We asked them for solutions. So we didn't make an RFP. We made a request for solution, where we told them, this is the services that we run today. Please tell us how you would do that differently and at which cost point. And then we did that for a few months, and we started seeing what solutions came in. We started seeing what that meant for the cost as well as the services we would provide. And then only when we felt very comfortable, very convinced that we would get a better option than offshoring, then we decided, okay, then we're going for the outsourcing. So at that time, we had actually engaged with the vendors for quite some time when the final decision was made. And then after that, then of course we went into to deciding on then who are we outsourcing to, which was the next step.
Okay. It's very interesting with the agile sourcing approach. It's more co-creating the solution with the partners instead of just forcing them into a solution.
That's right.
What are other benefits of going with the agile approach, if there are any others than co-creating?
I mean, so many benefits. I was actually, it's the first time I've run an outsourcing like this. I've done the RFP approach in the past. This is the first time I tried the agile sourcing, and to be honest, it was more difficult than I expected it to be, but it was also much, much more beneficial than I expected it to be. Initially, going into it, I thought this is easy because you're actually pushing all the documentation and all the requirements on the vendors, and you just kind of sit back and look at it. That's not the case. And second of all, I thought, probably we'll probably end up pretty much in the same space, but just with a different process. And that's also not true. We definitely got a much, much better solution and deal than we would have if we had done an RFP process. So I think the challenges that we saw with it was, our organization was a delivery organization. It was technical people running technology, and they now needed to change their mindset completely, because a big part of running the agile sourcing process is that you are not allowed to have an opinion on how things are delivered, actually. You shouldn't have an opinion on that. You should have an opinion on the outcomes only. So you need to be extremely sharp on which outcomes you want, but at the same time have almost no opinion on how the outcomes are achieved. And that's, of course, the complete opposite of what pretty much everyone in the organization was doing. I think most IT organizations hopefully have a good view on which outcomes they're producing for the business and whether those outcomes are beneficial or not. But not everyone. And many organizations tend to be very internally focused and very focused on just operating, not necessarily seeing what that means, what impact it has. So this is, of course, completely different. So we bring in people into this process that are very, very focused on how to do things and not so focused on the outcomes. And now we ask them to only focus on the outcomes. So a continuous theme throughout these meetings was, you shouldn't have an opinion on that. What are you happy with the outcome? And it was very, very difficult for many people to do, and for some they couldn't.
How the change part here, because there's of course different stakeholders in an outsourcing.
Yes.
So there is the business, then there is the IT organization, and then the people that are directly involved in the agile sourcing approach.
Yeah.
How did you then approach change management for those different stakeholders?
Well, first of all, it's a confidential project when you run it like this, right? The project ran for more than a year. You don't want people to know for that long that you plan to make a huge organizational change. So it was a limited number of people that were actually involved. Even a lot of people that afterwards felt like they should have been involved were not involved. Took a very, very cautious approach. So the stakeholder management was limited to few people that were in the project team. Of course, that grew over time, the more work we needed to do and the closer we got. But in general, I would say that the stakeholder management part mostly came afterwards, actually, and not so much during the process. But during the process, on the other hand, the stakeholder management was extremely difficult because the people that were involved were very directly impacted. So you're not managing stakeholders who, kind of indirectly impacted and they may or may not have an opinion. This is people who, it's their own jobs, it's their own way of working and how they see themselves. That was the difficult part, and I have to say, I underestimated parts of that. Especially, I would say, in the leadership team. The leadership team that we had in IT at the time was very stable. We had been probably pretty much the same composition for a bit more than 2 years or something like that. And it was a surprise to me how quickly and significantly the dynamics in that leadership team changed. Because you had people that were from basically within a few weeks went from being a good team working well together, and we still work well together, but the dynamics just changed completely. Some people were against it, some people were for it, some people felt encouraged by what we were doing, and others felt scared of what we were doing. And that just changed the dynamics completely in the team. Adding to that, we then also added new people to the leadership team. So we all of a sudden had people from procurement, from HR, from finance, even external consultants that were now actively part of the leadership teams. And all of that happened within a few weeks. So that was a quite dramatic change, actually.
Could you, now that people suddenly change position in or their position towards the outsourcing, could you have done anything different there? Like, could you have prepared them better, or?
I think it's difficult. Maybe there are some things we could have done, but it's just a transition people have to go through, and even though it was difficult, and even though it was a bit surprising to me how big the impact was, everyone did stay professional. We did do it. We managed to get it done, and even the people who were against it, they largely supported practically, not always, but in most cases they did support it, and we did manage to get there, right? So I think it was just how it had to be. Yeah.
Going back to the agile sourcing approach.
Yes.
You were running with 3 vendors in parallel.
Yes.
I imagine that took quite a lot of time to actually handle that.
Yes.
How did you work around that? How did you approach that part of the time commitment from all the people involved?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, one of the benefits is that a lot of the documentation is on the vendor. So you don't end up writing a lot yourself. You don't end up producing a lot yourself. Instead, the vendor is continuously updating their solution proposals. So they bring a solution proposal to you. You give feedback, and they then update it based on that feedback in a number of meetings. That, of course, reduces the burden a bit on our side. The other element is that it's actually important to run with more vendors in this process, because we didn't necessarily want what we were getting today, or we didn't want things to work the way that we were doing things today, but we did want to have an alternative to compare against, because we were not going to not outsource. So we didn't want to compare the solutions that were proposed to us with our own existing solution, because that was not really an option. So we wanted to be able to compare the solution that the vendor was proposing with another solution. So that's why we had to run multiple in the same space. But it did become a problem with too much work. And I would say when we got kind of towards the end of that process, where we understood what the solution was going to be, but we hadn't yet decided on how to do the transformation. So when we got to that point, we had to move down and only work with 2 vendors, because then the workload simply became too high. Part of the solutioning we asked them for was to do the transformation for us. So the transition plans, all the communication, what are you going to do before and after, and all that was part of what they were proposing to us. And when we got to that point, that's when we on our side need to involve more people, and also when the workload increased quite a lot on our side. So at that time, we had to only work with 2 in order for it to work.
You ended up outsourcing roughly 70-80% of the total IT organization?
Yeah, a bit more than 300 people, yes.
Yeah. How did you make that, like, how did you decide what remained and what had to go to the partner?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's also something we discussed quite a lot. There was 2 scenarios for the outsourcing. There was this, what we called significant outsourcing, and then one we called maximum outsourcing. And we went with the significant outsourcing, which is, like you say, the 70-80%. And we kept architects, we kept a big part of the security team. We kept a few people to do strategy and projects, programs, stuff like that, so we could still implement things ourselves, so we could still control our technology landscape ourselves. And that was important for us, because it was a first-time outsourcing for Rambøll, so we didn't really feel comfortable just kind of handing it all out. And also, we wanted to be able to shop around a little bit. To be honest, if we saw that now we're implementing something new, we wanted to be able to make an active decision to go with someone else than the chosen partner for competitive reasons, right? So we decided to keep that in-house, so that whenever we decide to change the scope of our technology, we could decide to go with someone else than who we had chosen initially.
Okay. And then you made the switch, and
Yes.
from being focused on the small group of people, then suddenly the rest of the IT organization and the rest of Rambøll and the business needed to be involved.
Yes.
What happened there?
Surprisingly little. That was I think the headline. Surprisingly little. We had spent an enormous amount of time preparing communication plans, backup plans, all kinds of things. And in the end, when we made the switch and announced what we were doing, I think very few people noticed, to be honest. Today, Rambøll is around 18,000 people, and there was 300 roughly that were moved to TCS, and they of course noticed. The immediate kind of contacts noticed. The rest of the organization, I would say, maybe they saw the article on our intranet, maybe they didn't, and otherwise they wouldn't have noticed.
So business as usual? Business
as usual, no surprise.
That's impressive.
I think also a big part of that is the fact that we had done the offshoring before. So most of the colleagues that were moved were either in the headquarters in Copenhagen or in the center in Chennai. That meant that they were not where the 18,000 people are. They are somewhere else. So for them, whether you're getting support from a Rambøll employee or TCS employee sitting in Chennai doesn't make a big difference, actually.
I guess the business was also more impacted when you did the going from local to global.
Yes.
Where you removed all the people from the local offices and had no on-site IT support and things like that.
Exactly.
I guess that's where the impact actually came.
That was when the big impact was. But actually, even that was more on paper. We lucked out a little bit, I would say, with the timing of that. Not that it was luck in any kind of way, but we did the globalization and created the offshore center just around the time of COVID. So when we had that big impact of removing the local IT staff from the offices, everyone was working remote anyway. So it was kind of like you're working with your IT colleague. COVID hits, they send you home. You come back to the office, and the IT colleague is no longer there. That's a little bit what happened, to be honest. But you're right. I mean, that is why the second change was not a big change. Yeah.
You also mentioned that you went into the outsourcing project with an ambition of saving around 25%.
That's right. How
did you come up with that number, or how did you get to that number?
That was a negotiation, to be honest. That was just pure negotiation. We saw we had made an estimate of the investment need into digital. And we then negotiated basically with the CEO and the CFO how much of that should we finance ourselves. We ended up at 25.5% is what we should finance, and then they would give the rest. Of course, not give, but based on good business cases and stuff. So pure negotiation.
Okay.
Yes, easy.
And how much have you managed to save?
So roughly 36%. So we overachieved quite a lot. And I would say this is where again the big difference is in this request for or the agile sourcing model. I'm sure that's because of the agile sourcing model that we managed to do that, because you can say that what that really does for the solutioning and the costing is that it allows the vendors to apply their best practices. They can tell us how do they need to operate this in the most cost-efficient way, and therefore the savings can simply be higher than they could if we had asked for something very specific. We can see that we do still have during the negotiations we had very few parts of our solution where we made very concrete demands, and those parts are just much more expensive than the rest. That's very clear.
So part of the negotiations, you went in saying that you wanted at least 25%? And how did you then add to the terms or the agreement that you could allow for more? Because I guess the vendor would actually just say, okay, let's cap it at 25%, then they are happy. or how did you then manage that?
Well, I mean, not just the vendors, to be honest. There were also some in our organizations that felt like, okay, now we reached the 25%, so done deal. Let's move on. So keeping that pressure on was key. And that's also why it was good that it was competitive, right? So we work with multiple vendors, because that meant that when we moved into those later stages, some of the vendors starting to say, well, we can give you 28 or 30, and then of course you get into more of a negotiation mode, but still solution based. And this was actually very important. And one of the vendors we actually deselected because they did keep lowering the price, but they weren't showing us how the solution would be impacted. So that was not very credible for us. It was important for us to get a low price, but not at the expense of service quality, because if we don't deliver good IT services to the organization, then that has a huge impact on Rambøll's profitability. We run a time and material business, so if IT services don't work, that we can see that immediately on the bottom line. So saving an additional 10 million in the IT cost is not necessarily a good thing if that leads to a loss on the business side that's bigger than that. So it was really important for us to keep that competitive pressure, but not look exclusively at price in that competitive pressure. It was a very balanced view of solution quality and price. And then the third one, which was also very important for us, was the people side. So how would the people be treated? Rambøll is a foundation-owned company, and the foundation was very interested in how we were making sure that people would experience this transition as a good thing for them.
For the ones that were employees that were moved to the partner. Yeah.
That's right. And actually we did, I'm not going to mention any names, but we did deselect one of the partners, even though they had a good solution at a good price point, but we were not convinced that people would enjoy working there. And they were deselected for that reason alone. So this was important for us.
Okay. You kind of, as part of the agile sourcing approach, you are more or less creating the solution until you sign the contract.
That's right.
How did that work when you got to the actual negotiation? Because there things are still up for discussion. You haven't made decisions on everything, but you have to sign the agreement pretty soon. Yeah. What were some of the challenges there or surprises?
I think the challenges was definitely when you get to that stage of the negotiations, you cannot have everyone involved anymore. But you still want to understand that what you are agreeing to doesn't negatively impact the solution you're getting. So in the final stages of the negotiation, it was actually only me from the global IT team that was part of it, and the rest of the team were busy preparing for the transformation. And that meant that I was sitting together with some external consultants, our lawyers, and our procurement team, and actually negotiating the last part of it, including solution changes. So that's, of course, a sensitive situation because, there's a risk that I agree to something that we actually don't want. So that was a bit of a tricky time because on one hand, we want to be able to make decisions right there and there in the meeting in order to make the negotiations progress. and in order to get the right price point. On the other hand, it's important to make sure that we understand what the implications are. And the way we managed that was simply that I was leading it from global IT side, and it was up to me to reach out to the relevant stakeholders when I thought that there was something we needed to discuss. The difficult part of that was really two things. First of all, the negotiations are happening very dynamically and at really odd times. So sometimes we're negotiating at 2 or 3 in the morning. There's no one you can call, and you just kind of have to go with it. That was one thing. The other thing, and this was back to the topic before around change. The other thing that sometimes proved a little bit difficult was who to reach out to when there are solution changes. Because there were, of course, the option to reach out to the ones who had been delivering the service in the past. But are they actually the right ones? Because who's going to be impacted by the changes to the solution? That's someone else. So I did have a couple of really unfortunate examples where someone felt I hadn't reached out to them, and they should be involved, but actually they shouldn't, because they were part of delivering the service today. They're not part of who is going to be impacted by the change.
Okay. And then moving from, you managed to get the outsourcing completed. You did the switch. 300 people moved to TCS.
Yes, TCS. Yeah.
The remaining organization was there. And then you were in a new situation.
Yes.
You also had this digital organization.
That's right.
What happened there?
So a lot of things happened, and maybe also a bit too many things. I'm usually someone who likes change, but I have to say maybe in 2024 we overdid it a little bit. To be honest, we made a number of changes. So in parallel with us doing the outsourcing of most of IT, we created a new digital organization. It was created actually like 1 month earlier than the outsourcing happened. We called Rambøll Tech, which was a new organization that was established to drive adoption of AI and development of digital products. And we created that organization by combining a number of different organizations, again, across Rambøll. So we had an AI center that was delivering solutions to clients. Rambøll also does client work on technology. So they had been building AI solutions for clients rather than for ourselves. So we took that team and we combined that with our global innovation team, as well as a digital development center we had. So simply a center of people doing coding and testing and all these things. We had not outsourced that, we had kept that. So those 3 entities we combined into a new entity called Rambøll Tech. Then we outsourced IT. We ran in parallel for a few months, we ran the remaining IT organization and this new Rambøll Tech organization. And then after the summer last year, we combined those 2 organizations into what is today called Rambøll Tech.
Okay, and that was too much change in 1 year? Or?
It was a lot of change. You can always, it was definitely, there's no doubt that today the organization is a little bit impacted by change fatigue. On the other hand, it was a good change. It was the right thing to do. So would it have been better to drag it out? I'm not sure. But definitely today we are in a period of time where we need stability in the organization for us to be productive, no doubt.
It's interesting that you are now focusing even more on products.
Yes.
Because Rambøll is historically a project organization.
Yes.
What challenges comes with that, or any surprises?
So many. Even just getting many stakeholders to understand what a product is and how it's different from a project has been difficult and is difficult today. Nothing that we do is organized around products. Nothing at all. Everything, like you say, is organized around projects. Down from all our legal terms and conditions, our financial processes, the way we sell, everything is around projects. And now, of course, we're making a product push. That's important for us because projects are good. We make a lot of money on projects, but they're also very vulnerable. We sell time and material projects mostly, and of course that means that our business fluctuates quite a lot with the market. We have almost no recurring revenue. So moving into that space with digital products that can stabilize our business is key, and also that it can allow us to move into new markets faster. today we are extremely slow in moving into new markets, not Rambøll specifically, but the industry. Because the way we do it is we would typically move into a new market by opening up a new office or making an acquisition. So the way that we change our scope of business is through organic growth, opening up new offices, acquisitions. Then we exit with divestments. It's very, very slow. It's very, very expensive. So we need a new business model. We need different business model, at least to supplement what we're doing for a while.
And what's the biggest challenge in making that switch from the project-based business model to the product-based?
So the biggest challenge right now is basically getting people allocated to the product work. So everyone in professional services, time material business, everyone is of course very focused on chargeability of staff. But that means that who's going to work on a product, developing a product, if they're busy being chargeable to clients. So being allowed to free up people's time to work on products is extremely difficult. That's the combination of the model of time material, people being chargeable, and then low margins, because our business is very low margin. So freeing up people, dedicating people to work on developing and running products is difficult, because there's always this opportunity coming in that you could sell at the same time for someone else, and then you get the money right now rather than at a certain later point.
So it's a switch in the KPIs as well, because
Yes.
Rambøll is very focused on billable hours as the main KPI.
That's right.
I assume.
That's right.
And now you have to change that focus to being product focused.
Exactly.
Okay.
Completely different KPIs. Yeah.
Historically, I imagine that Rambøll has been able to do a lot of innovation.
Yes.
There's a lot of brilliant engineers
Yes.
coming up with great ideas
Yes.
and making prototypes, and actually also delivering that to clients.
Yes.
What has then been the challenge going from having those innovative ideas and then make them scalable?
Few challenges, I would say. First of all, like you say, people at Rambøll, they're engineers, they're technically very capable and they are very creative. So they like to build new solutions. That's good. On one hand, that's good. On the other hand, it also means that they really, really don't like to use existing solutions. They like to build it themselves from scratch rather than use something that exists already, either in Rambøll or in the market. So sometimes we don't make the right choices when we want to solve a problem, because people think it's more fun just to build something themselves. The other thing is that people in this business, they like to build stuff. They're not so concerned with selling it, to be honest. That means that they think it's great to build something, and that's really cool. But what if we don't sell it? Then it doesn't help that we built something cool, and that's a challenge for sure. So one of the things that we're working quite actively with now, which is also difficult, is that maybe it's not the same individuals who came up with the idea or built the first version that should run it or that should own it going forward. So, when you are the person who came up with something and you maybe built the first version yourself, that's great. But are you going to be the right person to scale this now? Do you have the right profile that you can take this small first version of a product and make it a successful commercial product at scale? Most likely the answer is no. That is typically a different profile. And that's difficult because you are on one hand, you need to make that change, but you also want to acknowledge the work that has been done by that first person. And that can be difficult. And especially it's important because if you don't do that, if you don't recognize that work, the next time someone comes up with something, they're not going to highlight it. They're not going to make you aware of it. They're not going to, put it on the agenda for it to scale. So you want to create a culture where on one hand, you're recognizing and celebrating the people who come up with the good ideas, but on the other hand, you also allow those ideas to transition to something that's managed professionally.
And how are you managing that great innovation that happens across the organization? 18,000 people is a lot.
Yeah.
And there's like pockets of innovation happening all the places.
All
How are you then taking those brilliant ideas and capturing them in a global setup?
So We have so far done that very unsuccessfully, I would say. To be very open, it's been very difficult, and especially it's been difficult because of the unclear decision making. So we have had a very free model before, which was very focused on idea generation and less on growth and scale. And one of the things that we've changed just recently is it's not a specific thing in the technology organization, but in the overall operating model of the company, is that we have clarified decision making. So this has not been a technology specific problem. We've run with a very complex matrix organization in Rambøll for many years, impacting everything. So a combination of geography and business unit that has been very difficult to operate in at times, especially when it came to decision making. So that was changed earlier this year into a new model where it's very clearly the business units that decide on anything commercial, so and delivery, right? So that's all in the business units now, and that helps us a lot on when it comes to innovation as well, because it's now very clear who can decide whether or not a product has potential and who is going to take the accountability for the commercial success of a product.
Now that you mentioned commercial success,
yes,
how are you going about that part? Because Rambøll is historically known for selling projects,
yes,
and then selling products is something completely different.
Completely different.
How are you then approaching that part?
It's still early days, I would say, on that part of it. We have now, for the first time, we have a small team that does like client engagement and sales on digital products. We have done some work before with externals helping us out on an ad hoc basis, but now for the first time ever, we have a small internal team that works on this. And of course, the big challenge is that we can change some people's perspectives on our side. We can have product managers, and we can make sure that they have commercial awareness, and we can even help them with sales. But there's also a client here, and the client is often just as conservative as we are, and they like the time and material model. They're used to the time and material model. So convincing them is actually the difficult part at this point.
Is that because the products that you are prioritizing are replacing projects, or is it?
It's because that yes, yeah. So they're replacing projects, and that means that we're now asking the client also to change a lot in order to work with us for these products, and they still have the option of not doing it. So we're still offering our traditional services as well, right? So they can basically choose between doing something that's difficult for them, or going with what they're used to. And on the client side, it's not necessarily the current decision maker who benefits from the digital products. So on the client side, the decision makers are often benefiting from a time material model as well, actually. So the decision making and the benefits is disconnected at the moment, and that's one of the things that we're trying to see how we can align better now, so that we also can show a benefit for the people who are making decisions. I have no doubt that the products that we are selling have benefits for the clients, just maybe not the individuals on the client side who are making that decision.
Okay. And the focus for the products that you're doing now, where are you then kind of prioritizing your efforts? Is that towards internal optimizations, or is it more commercial opportunities towards the clients?
Yeah. No, that's a good one as well, because we have actually had a lot of discussions around this recently, around whether we should change the mix a little bit. We have been roughly, I would say maybe 1/3 focused on new revenue, and 2/3 focused on efficiency. It seems now that we're going to shift even more to efficiency, simply because that we can see that there's a lot more potential than we thought even 6 months ago. And also because that it's simply easier to do. It's a lot easier to implement. We're used to implementing efficiencies. We're not used to our whole model, like you say, performance management, anything is not so geared on the new revenue side. So what we're doing now is we are focusing our efforts on new revenue where we already have success. So we have parts of our business that's already good at this. So there we say, okay, you keep going, speed it up, do more. But for the rest of the organization that has not yet cracked the code on how to sell digital products, we say, okay, but then maybe focus now more on efficiency, because there's actually a lot of potential still there.
That makes sense.
The trick then is, how do we avoid to take all that efficiency and just give it away to the customer, right?
Then because you want to improve your margins
we
rather
want to
than
improve our margins. Exactly. That's the trick. We haven't cracked that one yet.
Okay.
Still working on it.
So staying at the same price point, but being able to deliver it more effectively is the ambition.
That's
or
the
somewhat
ambition.
the same price point.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
We'll probably have to share it a little bit, but that's okay.
Yeah, but that also makes you a more competitive company, right?
Exactly.
Now that you merged the software development center, the AI team, the digital team, and IT into one organization, yes, that was a big change in itself. Have you already seen some of the benefits from doing that? Are you able to deliver faster? Is it better time to market, or how?
Yeah, I would say, definitely, we have seen enormous benefits on two fronts, I would say. One is the digital development center that does the software engineering for us. There we have seen a much more focused effort now. So they were being productive, of course, but not working on the right thing. So there has simply been big improvements coming from managing the portfolio much better, having that discussion around which digital products are we actually prioritizing, and then allocating resources there has been a big benefit. So it allowed us to maybe not move faster overall, but move faster on the things that matter. And then the other big benefit I would highlight is on the integration between kind of traditional IT processes and digital development. Because, of course, it's difficult to say if it would have been different, but I suspect that we would have seen many more challenges with working together across a separate IT organization and a separate digital development organization. We see challenges, but we resolve them surprisingly fast. Often there are no conflicts. It's all perception. So that we are definitely seeing. And then I think very importantly, when we did the outsourcing of IT, the part of the IT organization that remained in Rambøll, they actually felt a little bit like the B team, which was surprising for us because we were afraid before the outsourcing that the people that were going to be transitioned to TCS would be worried. But actually what happened was that the people that remained in Rambøll were the ones that were worried. The ones that went for TCS, they got a warm welcome and were now part of a huge new organization with many opportunities for them. Whereas the people that remained in Rambøll, they saw that, okay, they are now sitting in the remaining part of an IT organization with all the fun stuff happening in a separate digital organization. So they were actually, out of the three, they were the ones that were the least happy. So merging those two organizations also did a lot to kind of boost the engagement levels and the energy in the organization.
Yeah, they have had more opportunities to see in front of them. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
You are working on some cool projects, I imagine,
yes.
or products.
Yes, exactly.
Can you mention a few, either some that are focused on efficiencies internally or in the project delivery, and some that are more commercial focused?
Maybe let me highlight two things that we're working on that I am personally very excited about. One of them is we have a new AI report generator that we recently launched. There's no doubt we spend an enormous amount of time on just writing reports for clients. So we launched earlier this month Origami, as we call it, which is a report generator. So based on our historical reports that we have thousands of, combined with some new data points that is specific to the situation, we can now write reports using AI much faster, of course. And that's an exciting one because that saves us both a lot of time, but it actually also opened up new market opportunities for us, because a big part of what has prevented us from growing in some markets in the past few years has been lack of people. We simply couldn't find the people we needed. So now we can free up a lot of time from people writing reports, and thereby we can seize new market opportunities. That's exciting. That one I'm really proud of. And then the other one I would highlight is this, and this is early days, but the work we're now starting up on agentic AI in our supporting functions. I think that's one of the ones that's really going to have a big impact. And also one that is extremely exciting because it's one of those where you can get everyone on board. You know, if sometimes you come with the products like this or new ideas, and you kind of have to convince the organization. Not so when we talk about agentic AI. I mean, people are extremely excited about it, and how fast we could mobilize the right people across the enabling functions to work on this was impressive. Everyone really wanted to be part of it and super energized. That's always much nicer than going out with something that you're trying to kind of force people to do, right? Or when you have to do change management, it's because you are asking people to do something they don't want to. It is a bit more fun to provide an opportunity to people to work with something they think is really cool.
And the support functions that you're focusing on, are there some specific use cases that you are looking at?
I would say a little bit similar to what we talked about before with the report generator. One of the challenges for Rambøll is this globalization journey we're on, which means that we often have a huge disconnect between the resources we have available to run a global company and the resources that we need. So I think a good example is our legal team. We have a very good but also very small central legal team. All the right people, really fantastic people, but we just don't have enough. And we have very, very many contracts we need to sign and look through, and all that is client contracts, is vendor contracts, is employment contracts, and that's a case where you can say, we can very, very fast improve the quality of the work that's happening there, and thereby de-risk how we operate using agentic AI, which would be very, very difficult to do by staffing up with hundreds of legal experts, right? And I'm excited about this for a couple of reasons. First of all, because I think it's something that will very, very fast generate a lot of benefits for our organization. But also, it's actually nice to do something where you're not focused on, reducing an organization, saving costs, but you're focusing on delivering better outputs.
You've been on a quite exciting journey from consolidating from a fragmented local setup to a global setup, then outsourcing, and then now focusing on digitalization and changing more or less the business model or parts of the business model of Rambøll.
Yes.
I assume that a lot of companies are probably looking into something similar as this.
I hope so.
What would your advice to be to those companies that are sitting in this situation and want to embark on either outsourcing or digitalization? What is it that you see as being the key things for them to focus on?
Well, I think it's important to not just think about technology. Very often within technology organizations, you see people very, very narrowly focused on technology. We're seeing, of course, also increasingly that people are becoming focused on data, understanding the need for managing your data in a professional way. I still think most organizations probably underestimate the efforts that need to go into things like upskilling and adoption. And also, if we're talking about commercial products, the efforts that need to go into to sales and things like that. Because you tend to become, at least in the technology organizations, very, very focused on technology because that's what you think is fun. Maybe you can be convinced to also, look a little bit at the data. But the adoption piece in particular, I think it's so critical that we don't forget about that, because we can create all the great solutions we want, and if we don't think about how people are going to use them, if we don't nudge people to use them, we're not going to get the benefits. That's for sure. And there are so many good products out there that are not being used, both in the commercial market as well as internally in various organizations that have built them. So the return on investment in having the right people driving adoption for you is probably where the opportunity is right now.
So both internal and external adoption of the products that you're building. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Exciting stuff, Jesper.
Yes.
Thank you very much for all the insights. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.